the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps. If exposed, remove clothes. The emergency broadcast system.
Podcast for the curious mind. I don't know what that means.
Broadcasting live from a German-made microphone deep within the multifamily bunker. I am Corey Hussing here with Devin DeLapp. Hi, how's it going? Happy Sunday, Devin.
Hi.
Yeah,
I'm doing great.
I know, right? Nice night of sleep. All ready for we've got a special guest that has come on our show. But before that, little ad read from Break
Is your
Fix Bros.
computer acting like your New Year's resolution? Broken? Then call Break Fix Professionals. Break Fix Professionals will scan and clean your system for free. That's right, free. And no credit card is required. But that's not all. They are your go-to source for all your misfit PC needs. Windows or Apple? Well, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
To Break Fix Professionals, call now at 605-951-9898 or learn more at breakfixpros.com. Break Fix Professionals. If you can't fix your New Year's resolution, at least fix your
PC. I think I would have fixed it by now. The thing is am I waiting for it to be irrelevant for New Year's before I actually do the new? I should just do a new ad read, different theme. Are you there, Devin?
Yeah, I'm listening. I don't think that's bad. I mean, it's up to you if you want to change it up.
Maybe March. It's a little late in March to be doing a New Year's show, don't you think?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's
maybe updated. Is your heart broken? We should have done one for Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah, you should.
Didn't even think about that. All right. Well, we got a very special guest. Gurpreet Padda has joined the show. Dr. Padda has joined the show. He's a graduate from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Medical School. He has served residencies in surgery and anesthesia. He's board certified in pain medicine, anesthesiology, and age management. Here's the reason why I was very interested when I saw him on the podcast guest list. In his bio, and it's just a few paragraphs long, so stay with me. But this is what I thought was interesting. He said, in past, society viewed alcoholism, drug addiction as moral flaws. Popular treatments involved imprisonment, sentencing to asylums, and of course, church-guided prayer. Now, not surprisingly, these methods were in general ineffective. Today, we understand that addiction is a brain disease characterized by fundamental and long-lasting changes. Like other chronic diseases, addiction can be managed successfully, and modern treatments are based on scientific research, enabling people to counteract addiction's powerful disruptive effects on the brain and behavior to regain control of their lives. Treatment is firmly based on conventional neurochemistry and behavioral psychology, but based upon the individual patient's paradigm. Treatment options may include multidisciplinary techniques, such as psychedelics, ketamine therapy, EMF fields, use of hormesis, I don't even know what that means, nutritional programs to reduce neural inflammation. I was doing so good up to that point. Fascia disruption to uncover latent emotional roadblocks and many more. So I was, because there's a serious opioid addiction in today's world. Like I don't know when it started. Probably back in the 90s, maybe earlier. Anyway, well, let's ask the expert. Dr. Padda, thank you so much for joining our show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I hope I didn't bore you too long there.
No, I loved it.
So now how long have you been doing medicine for? Or I guess not medicine, but in the medical field.
So I started medical school when I was 17. I'm 58 now. So I graduated when I was 22, 23. So what, almost 30 years?
Why medicine? What was the push?
I love biology. There's a lot of stuff I love, but I mean, I love biology. I love biochemistry, and it was fascinating. But I started my world off in rehabbing houses when I was 14 and 15. And I started my world in construction. And so I
Really?
owned my first construction company when I was 14.
Congratulations on getting out.
And a big chunk of my business world is in real estate. And but I've been an entrepreneur and a hustler since I was a baby. Just because I grew up in India, and we grew up in the border with Pakistan, and it was a very tumultuous place. And there's a huge backstory. It would take us an hour to go just through the backstory. But
We love backstories of Phantom Facts. We do.
Yeah. So my grandfather was a freedom fighter, and he had been in charge of Pakistan, Lahore. And when India separated, I was born 17 years after the separation between Pakistan and India. And so when the British left, they looted India, took everything. They took trillions of dollars of currency, trillions of dollars of asset value. They took a country that was probably had the third largest GDP in the world, and over the course of a few hundred years collapsed it to a third world country. We had the highest education level in the world, and the Brits came in and basically robbed us. And so they took a lot of stuff, and then they left us with India and Pakistan fighting. My grandfather was I'm Sikh, and Pakistan is mostly Muslim. He was the elected governor of Lahore, and the Muslims during that separation didn't like that. And so there were fatwas issued against our family. So, there was a tumultuous.
What is a fatwa?
Period. A fatwa is an edict by a religious individual, basically says, go kill that family, go kill every male heir in that family. And so when I grew up in an area where I had a bodyguard and a Belgian Malinois that spoke only Dutch and German. And being an idiot child, I would always do stupid things and try to get out of supervision. And eventually they ended up having to send me to a boarding school where people didn't know who I was. And I still had my bodyguard and I still had my Belgian Malinois. But I got to grow up in a very tumultuous place where there were air raid sirens, there were bombings, there was cataclysm. And I didn't even see my parents for years, probably 5 or 6 years while I lived in a boarding school.
Oh, wow. Is that still like in effect? Your fat?
No, it's gotten a lot better. I was just in India last week for 2 days. I went to do some stuff, and I literally was on the ground, I think like 31 hours, and was back. But no, it's gotten a lot better. In India also economically has improved tremendously since I was young. When India had, at the time that I was in India as a child, they were experimenting with communism. And so in order to buy anything, you had to have the government give you a permission, a chit that said you could buy something or do something. And as a child, I knew that I couldn't do stuff that I wanted to do. And I knew that even though you could buy a car or you could buy something that was big like a tractor, I knew that my family struggled to do it because they didn't have those chits, which were governmentally controlled. And so, it's that concept of top-down economics. The government ended up essentially experimenting with communism, failed utterly, and then went straight to capitalism and has done very well. It's doing the exact opposite of what we're doing in the United States. We're headed toward communism, and we'll quickly realize that a top-down economy doesn't work.
That's a show for another day.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my backstory. So I loved being a capitalist. I came to the U.S., lived in the urban core.
How old were you when you came to the U.S.?
9. Lived in the urban core. Couldn't speak much English and used that to my advantage because I have bad ADHD and I could pretend like I didn't speak English. And so I could cause all kinds of mischief. But I also went door to door selling greeting cards.
I knew it.
Yeah. So I sold door to door greeting cards to people in the urban core of St. Louis, quickly realizing the first concept of business, which is even if you sell it, collect the money first. Because I would sell these door to door greeting cards that were customized for the person for Christmas. And by the time Christmas came and the cards came, and I went to go collect the money from, you know, Shaniqua or whoever it was, or whatever particular name was on there from the family of, they were long gone, or they didn't want to pay. And so then I had to eat the cost. And so that quickly brought me to, from the sales concept of understanding that, to trying to cut people's grass and trying to help out people fix up their houses, and then hired a team of people. And by the time I was 14, 15, I had a crew of 4 or 5 working for me, and they would drop me off at high school because I couldn't drive. And so I had these people that were in their 40s and 50s working for me. And so I loved business, but I loved computers. And I loved science. And so eventually an inflection point came that I had to make a decision. What was I going to do? And being a good Indian child, because your parents want you to go be a doctor, I ended up liking being a doctor too. So I did that, but I still did my computer stuff. I still did my other stuff and continue to do that stuff. So we've got a couple million square feet of multifamily commercial and retail space. And then
he's got a lot more than me.
It's fun. I mean, it's a blast.
He's a unicorn of doctors. He's got his hands in every field available.
But I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm entrepreneurial. And so I always look at, what are the problems I see in front of me, and how do I fix that problem? What can I see? And so I ended up being in surgery, got a little bored, and ended up doing anesthesia because it was very complex from an intellectual standpoint. After a while, I did pediatric
anesthesiologist.
I'm sorry?
I got a buddy who does that. He's an anesthesiologist.
Yeah, it's a blast.
But he loves it.
Yeah, it's intellectually just awesome. But then I ended up, after about 12 years as a pediatric anesthesiologist, I decided that I wanted to do more. Instead of impacting one patient at a time, I wanted to impact large groups of patients. So I used my skills, did adult pain, and then I spread from there into figuring out why people have pain. And at the same time, I realized there was a huge epidemic of addiction. And at the same time, I realized there was an epidemic of obesity. And then I was trying to put all that together. And that's where I ended up, is dealing with what's the common nexus between pain, addiction, obesity, diabetes. What's 2/3 of U.S. healthcare budget? Why do people have all this stuff? And so,
go ahead.
That's where I'm at. That's what I treat now, which is metabolic inflammation.
What age were you when you made this transition from surgeries to switching?
I was probably I made the surgery transition quick. Like I got smart fast, because I was at Cook County Hospital in Chicago doing trauma, and it just happened to be during the nursing strike, and all the Filipino nurses quit. And so that left me as an intern managing reams and reams and reams of patients, and doing IVs and doing chemotherapy infusions, and cleaning out wounds, and having never left the hospital for about 3 months at a row. Coming back to my car and finding homeless people living there. I quickly realized that as a surgery person, as a surgery resident, and that I was never getting to go home, but the anesthesia residents were. So I was like, maybe I'll do that instead. And this is real boring, changing wounds. And so I did the anesthesia. So I learned that quick. Then the pediatric anesthesia, it took me about 12 years before I transitioned from that into pain. And then about 4 years when I started to getting a decent mastery of that, so I could say, okay, these are other things I need to explore.
I mean, I feel like you mentioned pain and opiate addiction as 2 of the 4 things you mentioned, obesity and diabetes, the other 2.
Yeah.
But I feel like pain and opiate addiction, those sort of go hand in hand.
They can. It's not uncommon. So all mammals, in fact, I would tell you all mammals, everything from elephants to dolphins, any kind of higher creature, they all have issues with a desire to get out of their heads. It's a hedonic drive. And so elephants will eat rotten fruit so that they can get high and drunk. You know, dolphins will touch each other with puffer fish to get the toxins from it. You know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. Animals will find patches of mushrooms so they can use them to get out of their heads to experience another reality. Human beings have been using psychedelics as well as mu agonists, which is opiate agonists, forever. It's just that as they become more pure, they become more easily addictive, and they also become more dangerous. So the difference between smoking opium and having fentanyl is a world of difference. It was hard for people to overdose on opium if they had to have it in a pipe and they were, you know, they were smoking the raw opium poppy. But as they started to make it better and make it heroin, black tar heroin, and things of that nature, people would overdose and die. Well, now it takes micrograms, like dust of fentanyl, to kill people because it's so pure. So one, there's a natural tendency for all creatures to want to get out of their heads. And two, as you purify the substance, it gets a lot worse and it becomes more severe. And these things, there's a reason for this. There's an underlying reason.
Do you feel like there's a malicious intent upon the people that are creating these drugs to make people addicted, or do you think it's just the natural progress of science purifying it until they get a?
Well, I mean, I think it's a natural progression of all of what we do as humans is to try to figure out that key element that does what we want it to do at the highest possible level. And so that's just the drive of being a human being, that we have the ability to manipulate our environment in such a way that it becomes so dangerous to us that it can kill us. So that natural drive is always there. But as in terms of what the motivation is for the people doing the distribution, you have to think about that for a second. If you were a drug distributor and you killed off the thing that was providing the demand, then why would you do that? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you kill your customer? And so I don't think they're doing it intentionally, but I think they just can't regulate it. And I don't think that's the whole issue here. So, you know, it's the chemical compound causes an effect. That effect is not necessarily an addiction. And people always say, oh, the chemical compound is the addiction. Let me give you an example so that we're on the same page, because I view addiction maybe a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
So they did studies on rats, and they took these rats and they threw them into a terrarium, and they put a rat in a terrarium, and they gave the rat the opportunity to have water, or and the other side, they gave the rat the opportunity to have water plus cocaine. And the rat kept going to the cocaine water, eventually just overdosed on the cocaine water and died. And they said, oh, if you give rats cocaine, they overdose and die. So if you give them an opportunity to have this drug, they're going to overdose and die. Okay, well, kind of made sense. That was our initial neurobiology experiment. They also did the same thing with morphine, found the same exact thing. What's more interesting is they did an experiment that gave the rats the option of water, sugar water, or cocaine, and they went to the sugar water first. And they just until it ran out. And then they went to the cocaine. But they
So cocaine bears
water more than they wanted the cocaine, which explains this whole obesity thing. So that tells you there's a hedonic drive. There's a dopaminergic drive to get there. And so purely based upon that experiment was our initial foray into why do people get addicted? So we made an assumption. You give them the opportunity and they're going to do it. But that's not the real case. So in the Vietnam War, 20 to maybe perhaps up to 40%, it was probably 25%, but people have said it could be 40%. In the Vietnam War, 20% plus of the people that were in combat were daily using heroin. And Nixon did not want to repatriate these people because he didn't want a bunch of heroin addicts walking the streets of the United States. He was in opposition to that. And so there was this whole initial push of how do we keep people off of heroin? How do we prevent them from using heroin when they repatriate? And they set up this whole system, and they set up a governmental monitoring system and an anti-addiction board and all this other stuff. And they brought the people back. They brought them back, and only 5% of them used narcotics in the United States, which is very similar to the underlying rate of narcotic use in the United States. So what happened? Why were they addicted there, but not addicted here? And so that brings about the second rat study. So they took another group of rats and they said, okay, we're going to make this aquarium bigger, and we're going to put some toys in it. We're going to put other rats that are kind of sexy and let them hang out with them. And we're going to give them an opportunity to drink water or cocaine. Well, they tried the water, they tried the cocaine, and they left the cocaine water and said, we don't want that. We want to have sex with the other rats. We want to play on these toys. We want to play all day with our friends. They ignored the cocaine the cocaine usage, and they lived. And none of the rats used the cocaine. So that was the issue. It was the loneliness issue that was underlying it, which is one of the fundamental problems of addiction that's misunderstood. Underlying a lot of this addiction is tremendous fundamental loneliness. And if you don't get to that, you can't really help the addiction. And our neurobiology model, frequently people just say, oh, take this Suboxone or take this drug, and they totally forget the other components that are leading to the underlying addiction, which is depression, loneliness, anxiety, social connectedness. And then also the things that predispose you to that is the neuroinflammation, the severe inflammation in our human brain now.
So like that makes a lot of sense, because when you get that way, a lot of people just want to escape. And the best way to escape is drug use or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So if I give you, I'll give you another rat model. So because it's easy to talk about rats, nobody gets pissed. So another rat model is they took all these rats and they gave them the standard American diet versus a wild diet. And the standard American diet has something very interesting in it. It has vegetable oil. And vegetable oil, which is an omega-6, has all kinds of interesting properties that lead to severe inflammation. But they weren't studying that part of this diet. What they wanted to study was the release of oxytocin in the brain of the mother rat.
Oxytocin is
the love hormone. It's the thing that allows you to connect from one person to another. And it's a thing that when a mother looks at her baby at the distance between her nose and her breast, and she's looking down at her baby, it's released in gigantic amounts. It's bonding. When you meet somebody that you like, your oxytocin levels go up. It's a bonding hormone. Okay. Well, in these rats, there was no oxytocin if you gave them vegetable oil. So it prevented them from bonding. It created loneliness. And then that created epigenetic factors so that the next progeny of rats, even though they weren't exposed to that much to that much vegetable oil, they changed their genetics so they weren't producing oxytocin anyway. And so as you went sequentially down this genetic line, they produced less and less oxytocin. So if you bring this back to vegetable oil and you think about it for a second, a lot of our dramatic increase in vegetable oil happened in the 1970s, right around the time that Nixon took us off the gold standard, right around the time that canola was introduced. It was around 1971. It was right around the time the American, the nutritional dietary guidelines kicked in. So
was that by mistake, all of this happening at once in your opinion?
There's a website called WTF 1971 that has a lot more information on it than I'm going to share with you here. But there's an interesting thing. I mean, the reason why we went off the gold standard is that we had to close the gold window. We didn't have a choice. We had been running on fumes for a while, and we had to convince the American public to give up their gold, and promising them that, they were going to get the highest, best value for it. And so we seized their gold essentially, because that was an independent way for them to have a currency.
But I mean, between going to the gold standard and then
the dietary guidelines. It's everything is based on incentives. So if you tell me the incentive, I'll tell you the outcome. If your incentive is that I start, Ansel Keys is one of the doctors who had the diet heart hypothesis. And he essentially said that eating traditional food with saturated fat from meat was bad, and you should instead avoid fat. And at the same time, you can eat all the sugars you want. That's why we always had this low fat food. And the more low fat food you have, the worse the worse your inflammation, the worse your obesity. And so there's that. And then there's also the concept of the dietary guidelines are used to help in creating subsidies to large food agricultural production facilities. So we produce a lot of corn, which turns into high fructose corn syrup, which is itself a problem. I mean, we could spend an hour just talking about high fructose corn syrup, but so that's part of it. You produce these food subsidies that rewards the farmer, and the food distributors distribute the food, and then you use food stamps to give to the people to go buy the subsidized food. And all of a sudden you have this circle of processed and hyper processed food that people consume that we know is very damaging to them because it has high amounts of sugar and high amounts of vegetable oil. The other thing you got to realize is that vegetable oil, omega-6, if it becomes rancid, you can't tell. You actually have taste buds that actually favor rancid vegetable oil. Whereas if you have an omega-3 that goes rancid, which is fish oil, you won't even be in the same room with it because it smells like rotting dead fish. You don't want to be anywhere near it.
What you keep talking about this inflammation of, I don't know what I know inflammation. I know
neuroinflammation.
Okay, all right. What does that entail? Neural inflammation. I just think swelling of the brain. That's
no, it's much more than that. So neuroinflammation is just a generic term. It just means a hyperactivation of the entire inflammatory cascade in your brain. So it means all the glial cells are active. It means that you're spending a lot of energy defending your brain from chemical compounds. And when it does that, there's a high amount of glutamate that gets transferred. It's a neurotransmitter. Glutamate also happens to be found in a lot of Chinese food. And that glutamate is a neurotoxin, and it kills off certain sets of cell bodies. It also affects your hippocampus, so it prevents memory formation, and then it increases your risk of cognitive impairment. So like Alzheimer's and things of that nature. Alzheimer's is really type 3 diabetes. It's diabetes of the brain. So that's why we have this huge Alzheimer's rise now, because people are more and more insulin resistant, and they're starting to get not only diabetes, but they're getting diabetes of the brain as well.
Does it also work with like lack of production of milk to a new mother?
It might. There's some stuff with that, but I don't know if there's enough with that. And I mean, it does have other factors that is very interesting. It radically reduces fertility rates in subjects that are exposed. So you get this vegetable oil stuff and this inflammatory stuff. If you make if you start making vegetable oil on your own, let's say you're a little village in India and you decide that you're going to make vegetable oil on your own, you might inadvertently end up with some gossypol in your vegetable oil because it's one of the degradative products. Gossypol is a permanent sterilization agent. It kills off your ability to reproduce. Now, gossypol might be useful to kill off populations of pigs in the wild if you want to control their population. But in the United States, we've got a historic population decline. We've lost population. But for illegal immigration, we'd be net negative because you need 2.1 people produced per woman, and we're down to like 1.4. And we're in net negative territory. Most of the westernized world is in net negative territory. Now we've got a bunch of immigration. The benefits and risks of it are that's a separate argument, but that, we're at the point where within 20, 30 years, I mean, China's already there. I mean, China's already net negative.
Japan's really screwed too.
With Japan. Oh yeah. Japan's been screwed for 10 years, 20 years. They could have predicted this.
But wouldn't you say that's more, I mean, that's economic influence though too, because it's expensive to raise. I have 4.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot. And I understand there's a lot of people I talk to, they only have 1 or 2 because they're like, I can't afford to have any more.
Well, that's part of it.
That adds on to it, right?
That's part of it, but it's also sperm count. So the average sperm count's reduced by about 65, 70%. And we're at a critical amount of sperm. 40 million sperm per milliliter is a critical amount. We used to be at 90 to 95 million on average. And last year we were at about 45 million. And that's directly related to dietary intake. And I just did a presentation on sperm count. And then, this also brings about this whole thing of, why is that? Why is it that we've got this radical decline in sperm counts? Why is it our fertility rates are going down? And then you start to wonder, is there something associated with intrauterine effects on the uterus and environmental exposures? If you start to dig into that a little bit, you start to get concerned that we have these environmental obesogens, things in the environment that make us fat, which also are endocrine disruptors. They screw up your endocrine system. So they make male embryo more feminine, and they make female embryo more masculine. And so then you start to look at transgender communities, and you'll notice that the traditional family, the traditionals, the people that, grew up in the 40s, have about a 3 to 5% incidence of transgender. Whereas the Gen Zs, sequentially, generation after generation, if you look at it, it has gone up. And there are people that are estimating it could be as 25% of the population, could be as high as 50%. And so that's an environmental change. That's not a genetic change. There's been some sort of exposure. And then there's something called the anogenital distance, which is the distance between, it's the taint. It's the distance of the taint. And the shorter the distance of the taint, the more feminized the subject is. And so that's an issue.
So you want a large taint.
Yeah, and so they measured that on polar bears.
That's awesome.
Which are they're alpha predators.
Hey Richard, I got a job for you, bro.
They had to anesthetize them first because they weren't willing. And so the polar bears,
I missed out on
they were measuring their testicle volume, and they were measuring their taint distance. And they found out that sequentially, because they're the alpha predator, they're consuming all of the things that are consuming the things that are consuming the things that are consuming the pollution. They're finding that there's high concentrations of pollution in the alpha predator polar bear, and their testicle volume is going down, and their sperm volume is going down.
So that's just environment.
Well, environmental exposure. It's chemical exposure, and so we've got the same thing for humans. We know that.
So we have chemical exposure, and then our food is also exposed.
Well, that's where our chemical exposure is.
Oh, I see. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's in what we're consuming. There is some airborne pollution as well, but it's not as big of a deal. In other countries, it's way higher. Like soot rates in India are, 100x what they are here.
How does that affect bear? Like what are they eating that's causing that?
They're eating other animals like seals, who are eating fish, who are eating algae. And so because they're the alpha predator, they get all of this stuff concentrated all the way up. So if you eat the liver of the thing that you just ate, it's concentrating all of the environmental toxins into the liver. Well, if that ate the previous liver of the thing that it ate, then that's concentrating all of those things. And so by the time that you get to the alpha predator, which is you and me and everybody else, we're eating all the things that ate the other things. And so we're getting a super concentrated form of toxicity. And also a lot of the herbicides, pesticides cause significant mitochondrial damage. Glyphosate especially is one of the ones that we know has significant issues.
And these subsidies that help support the production at the base root, you know, when you're talking about like farming.
Yeah.
Because I'm from South Dakota, raised South Dakota and Iowa. So like farming is huge in this community. And it's changed so much from the time when I was young. The height of the corn on July 4th is, you know, now ridiculous compared to where it was when I was growing up. And, you know, the amount of prepping and genetic modification just to the seed I mean, that's all you hear is those commercials for those corn companies now, and they're heavily subsidized too.
Yeah, I mean, they're not doing it because they're nice. They're doing it because they make a lot of money.
Yes.
And the more grain that you consume, the bigger the problem that you have. You have to, you know, we have this agenda in the United States of consuming more and more grain, based upon our dietary guidelines, based upon our food pyramid, which I fundamentally believe may have some issues, because the underlying issue with a grain consumption is that there are very few humans that actually tolerate grains very well. It causes leaky gut in most humans. A leaky gut is where the gap junctions between cells fall apart when they're exposed to gluten and gliadin. And when they do that, that allows fecal material to transfer across the gut wall into the bloodstream, which then causes an increased risk of autoimmune dysfunction. You know, that's part of it. So certainly we have a ton of grain and we have more leaky gut. We also have more autoimmune disorder. Then the other problem is that the grains are mostly carbohydrate. We get a ton of just pure sugar out of them. And we refine these grains to make high fructose corn syrup. So high fructose corn syrup is an interesting compound. Normally, when you think of sugar, you think of glucose, right? I mean, you've heard what glucose is. Well, sugar, table sugar, is not glucose. Table sugar, which we think of sugar, is a disaccharide. It's two sugars. It's one fructose and one glucose bonded together, and that's a disaccharide. And so technically, you should get 50% glucose and 50% fructose. That's 50-50. Well, high fructose corn syrup is supposed to be 55% fructose, 45% glucose. But the high fructose corn syrup that we're getting in our sugar sweetened beverages is way higher than that. It's like over 60%. So why would the agriculture company spend extra resources to make a high fructose corn syrup? Why spend that extra resource? And so that makes you then think, well, what's going on here? What's the difference between glucose and fructose? So glucose, when it gets into your body, makes you feel, it activates your serotonin system. It kind of makes you feel okay and makes you feel like, hey, that tasted good. I kind of like that a little bit.
A sugar rush?
Kind of. Yeah. It makes you feel attracted to it. And it says, hey, I kind of like that. Fructose, on the other hand, does something else. Fructose activates more of the dopaminergic circuit and makes you want it again in 14 minutes. It's like cigarette smoking. You're jonesing for it. You're demanding it. And it's the same concept of, I got to have that again. I got to have that again. That's why people that get on the bandwagon of high fructose corn syrup that have soda, they end up taking another hit of soda every couple of hour and a half or something like that.
So Warren Buffett, in essence, is a drug dealer. He just deals in sugar.
He's a dealer of Coca-Cola, which used to be originally cocaine.
Yeah.
So at one point, that's what the underlying recipe was. That was their secret recipe, coca or coca leaves.
Yeah. Just a sprinkle on that, Oh, Corey, it's awesome. South Dakota internet.
So that's kind of where we're, those are the kind of the things that I deal with in my patients so that I can educate them on how to organize themselves.
Okay, I got a question. So what diet do you do? Are you like a carnivore guy? I mean,
I'm pretty close to carnivore.
Yeah.
I do stupid things every once in a while. Like once every couple of weeks, I'll have a cupcake.
Everything
I
in
call it-
moderation, right, Doc?
yeah, I mean, extreme moderation, but most
Right.
of my dietary intake is extremely low carbohydrate, and I'm mostly carnivorous.
Because
Um,
Jordan Peterson, he's very much on a carnivore diet where he just has beef and salt, right? Like, and
Yeah.
he's like, it's not sexy, but I feel best I've ever felt.
yeah, it's and we know that imagine this if you were. So you're living 15,000 years ago and you're looking off in the distance and you see that giant animal over there on the hill and you're real hungry and you want to go eat something and you look at that thing and you go, maybe I'm going to eat that. What's that thing going to do? What's the likelihood of what it's going to do? What's the first thing it's going to do?
Run.
Yeah, it's going to fight or flight. It's
Yeah.
going to either fight you or run from you. And that may be too hard for you to deal with. So you start to think, well, maybe I'm going to eat this bush over here that has these berries on it. Does the bush want you to eat you? Does the bush want you to eat him?
No.
No, probably not. And so, but it can't run and it can't directly fight you. So how does it fight you?
It's interesting. There's a couple plants that'll change their flavor, their leaves once they're being eaten on, and other ones will poison their fruit.
Most of them will poison. And even if it doesn't poison you right now, it's going to make you have shits later. And so it's going to cause you to expel its seeds for it in another place so that it grows more plants.
Right.
And so it causes you to have GI discomfort. And as we refine these plants, because the plants that we have today, the broccoli that we have in 2023 does not look like anything like the broccoli we had in 1915. We've so changed these plants that they don't look anything like they used to. And we've modified them to the point where we've made them gigantic. So they look big, but they're nutritionally deficient. And they have chemical defense weapons inside of them that are very significant.
How do you counterbalance that, though? I mean, besides, I guess, growing your own vegetables?
You grow your own vegetables. You eat mostly meat. That's what I do. Meat, fish, eggs. And, I think that depending on the culture you're in, you can certainly be vegetarian. You can certainly get to be vegetarian and have a healthy diet, but you have to have saturated fat with it. And you have to have healthy saturated fat, which is usually butter, olive oil. But what you can't have is mazola, canola, margarine, things of that nature. So you have to avoid the bad oils and have the healthy saturated oil. And then you can get adequate amounts of protein through other sources. But what you want to avoid is a diet that has a ton of carbohydrate. And that's the key thing. You want to avoid that gigantic flux of carbohydrate, and you want to restrict the feeding frequency. So how the body works is that you're not intended to eat all the time. You're intended to starve most of the time, store up fat for when you need it, and then use that fat. And so you eat and you gorge in small portions, and then most of the time you don't eat. That's called time restricted nutrition.
Like intermittent fasting.
Yeah. And so, if we eat from the time we wake up to the time that we go to bed, we never deplete the glycogen out of our liver. If you don't deplete the glycogen out of our liver, which is 2,000 kilocalories or so, if you don't exercise constantly and deplete that glycogen, or if you constantly eat, you have 3 meals and 5 snacks a day, which is the average American intake. You never deplete the glycogen out of your liver, so you end up with a congested liver full of fat, which is why we have such a high rate of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and which is why we're also so insulin resistant. So those are the kind of things that we have to deal with.
Do you have a book? Have you written a book, or have you considered writing a book?
I have been. I teach nationally. I teach all over the country, and my website reversediabetes.md, www.reversediabetesmd, has free information. But I did write. I've written 3 books. And the last one was Next Level Your Life. It's a little backstory, but I've written some keto books. But I share this information freely because we don't charge for this. I mean, we want people to understand what's happening. I'm also on the board of directors of of a bunch of different professional societies where we try to encourage a change in eating in the United States. It's 2/3 of healthcare expenditure in the U.S. I mean, if we fix this one problem, we save 2/3 of healthcare expenditure. Do you know why we got food subsidies in the first place?
No.
I have no idea.
Okay. So we got food subsidies because of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. And what was happening is that the Southwest of the United States was starving to death. And we had been through some wars and we were afraid of more war. But about half the people that were being recruited into the army had sarcopenic wasting. They had lost their muscle and they couldn't function and they were malnourished. So we started to ship food from the Northeast down to the Southwest. And they started to ship food, but they couldn't let it rot on the way. So they had to hyper process it. And so we ended up giving subsidies to the people down there. And then the agriculture folks got used to those subsidies with hyper processed food. And that was the origin of processed food. It gets more interesting after that, but that's the origin. And now what we have is a whole different thing. Now what we've got is the malnutrition of excess, where we have too much food and people are way overweight. And now the number one reason why people came home from Gulf War, from Desert Storm and Gulf War, was because of obesity and obesity-related illness. And the number one reason why people can't get enrolled into armed forces is because of obesity and obesity-related illness.
Yeah, they actually loosened the restrictions on it.
Yeah, because they didn't have enough people.
Yeah, like they made it where you can have 22% body fat now and get in. When I was in, it was 18.
Yeah, and
it was like the limit. And if you're
and you also had to do a certain number of pull-ups.
Yeah,
and they don't require that now. It's a hang. So if you can hang there, then
we're gonna get our ass kicked, Corey, next morning.
So that's kind of the issue. I mean, there's more to it, but
you gave the example of the rats, and when they've given the three choices between water, sugar water, and cocaine water, they emptied the sugar water first.
Yeah,
and it just sort of feeds the idea that we're addicted to these foods that have no nutritional value. Naomi asked a question. I like to get through. So got a lot of questions. Thanks for. She says, I like to think that when a person is struggling with addiction, they are struggling with self-worth as individuals worth the gifts this earth has to provide. But I mean, is it a cycle? I mean, this addiction is also psychological, right? Like a person has low self-worth.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole problem with addiction. Addiction is not just a compound. It's an addiction in the process of things. It's in the addiction of the emotional aspect of the creature, of the subject, the rat. It's more than that. As I told you, loneliness is a huge problem in this. In humans, we associate it with other things, economic issues, self-identification issues, and all kinds of other things that we put in there. But it's more than the substance. Just because you got fentanyl sitting on the table doesn't mean you're going to run over and go snort some fentanyl or try to shoot it in your vein or lick it or put it on your tongue. Some people go, I don't do drugs. That's not me. That's not my personality. And they've made that's a shift for them that says, hey, that's not what I do. There's a lot of people that go to the grocery store and they don't buy a bottle of liquor every time they pass the aisle with liquor in it and get drunk and lay on the floor, even though it's freely available, because that's not their personality. And so that's part of it. It's certainly the exposure of the drug is something that's, a necessary precedent, but it's not the whole thing.
I mean, you're pretty much talking about a whole body cleanse of detoxing from just about everything, between how you eat to how you deal with your own personal depressions or, mental illness. I mean, I would think this rise in mental illness has something to do with the food people are consuming.
Yeah, there's Stephen Gundry did some stuff, and I think Dr. Palmer, Palmer, just wrote an amazing book on this. He's summarizing a lot of information on how food impacts schizophrenia. how food impacts depression, how food impacts anxiety. He and I have spoken on the same stages. He's an amazing speaker. Palmer, I think, is Robert Palmer, I think is his last is the guy. It's just an amazing book. And we've known this for a long time. He just happened to put it all together in a good place and summarized it. But there's food definitely impacts your brain health. And that's something that is a low-hanging fruit. It's something easy to fix. You may not be able to fix your poverty right away. You may not be able to fix your genetics. You may not be able to fix a lot of things in the world. But hopefully, if you can fix your food, and then things can incrementally improve one thing over another over time. And so that's kind of the approach that we end up taking.
Do you see a lot of the medical field switching to this realization, or
no, not yet? I think it'll take us another 5 or 10 years. The thing is that in medicine, we hold on to our beliefs and our cherished presumptions for a long time. We don't like to give up what we learned in medical school. That's issue one. Issue two is that most of the medical education that we have is driven through the pharmaceutical companies. So if it's not a drug, and it's not like something that they can sell, you're not going to see a lot of education about it. And it's not the first line then that physicians think of. And what I'm talking about doing, what we do, is a radical difference, because we have to spend time with our patients, and we may not get paid by anybody to spend time with the patient, to coach them and say, hey, these are the things that we have to go through. About half of my patients have PTSD. And, in order to manage PTSD, you just can't like throw some drugs at them and go, oh, here you go. Here's some drugs and good luck. Because there's a lot more to it than just the medication management. There's a lot of coaching, and there's a lot of neurobehavioral change, and there's subtle things that you can do. I have a lot of my veterans that have PTSD volunteer in a wolf sanctuary, because one alpha predator recognizes another alpha predator, and both of them are on hyper alert, and they befriend each other, and they watch out for each other's environment. I also, a lot of times, for people that aren't veterans, will encourage them to get a dog that they can work with at home at night, that watches out for them, so it will alert them if there's a noise. Because sleep disturbance is a big problem with this. So I have them sleep in a dark, cold room that's pitch black, and have the dog in there, and the dog is their comfort animal. And so you have to think outside the box, outside of the medications.
Well, it seems like the medical field is how many patients can you see today?
Well, that's the way it's designed. Yeah, that's the way it's designed. And so that's what makes it a challenge.
When I was going to school for electrical work, the textbook was sponsored by Southwire, which was a tool company.
Yeah.
And there was literally one lesson in there that was just a advertisement for every tool they sold. Like, here's your list of tools. By the way, Southwire makes all of these tools. And I feel like, man, if they do it, in school systems like that, I would think the medical field would have similar.
It does. That's where I would tell you 70 to 90% of all professional societies that receive that are out there that do the education receive funding from pharmaceutical agency. And so if I'm the guy giving you the money, there's a possibility you may be more favorable to the things I'm teaching. And unfortunate part about it is that the people that approve these drugs also get funding from the pharmaceutical companies. You would think that it would be illegal for the Food and Drug Administration people that approve these medications to get funding from the drug companies, the very drug companies that they're supposed to be reviewing. But that's not true. In fact, a big chunk of their money comes from these drug companies.
You think with money in everyone's pockets there, in that little ecosystem, how do you foresee 5 to 10 years the medical field changing?
I have no idea.
It's like this hope.
It's scary. I mean, we need to do something. And, there's this is something that I'm strongly pushing that, look, if you receive drug money, you shouldn't be allowed to be on the FDA. You shouldn't be in the CDC. You shouldn't be in a position where you approve or disapprove that drug. I think that that's an ethical boundary that you shouldn't have. You shouldn't be doing that. And there's something called corporatism. Corporatism is when the government and corporations collude. It's not communism, it's corporatism. I think Mussolini is who coined
Fascist.
corporatism. And it's more fascism, but it's when the government and the corporations start to collude and work in the same direction. And it's usually it's the human person on the other side of it that doesn't have as much choice when government and corporations start to collude. And when people from corporations end up in government, and when they leave government, end up back in corporations, and you have this cyclical back and forth between corporations and government, that creates a problem. And that's a moral
all
hazard,
over. It's all over too. Especially when you start talking about like the Federal Reserve System, the Treasury system, the bankers bouncing back and forth between that.
Yeah.
But also in my town here, I just got a letter for garbage. Okay, we decided we're gonna go with one trash company, and it's gonna be like $80 a month or something. But you can opt out of it and use who you want. But then you have to pay the city $11 a month just for the privilege of using someone else and not paying $75 a month. Because I only pay like $35 for mine. And I'm like, this is jacked up on a major level.
Yeah.
Then you get Spike Cohen in here and we get all those council members blasted on for Facebook.
It's scary. I mean, it's one thing with trash, which is still, but it's scary when it's medical, because you go to your doctor and for the most part you're hoping to get fixed whatever's wrong with you, or make sure nothing is wrong with you. But I mean, by the way you're describing it, it sounds like most of the medical field, either they know, but they're overwhelmed by taking on such a structure, or they don't know and they're just proud they ace their pharmaceutical test. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so the first medical schools were started by pharmaceutical companies because they needed high-powered salespeople to sell their drugs. And the easiest way to do that was to influence a cadre of people. And so that was the first origin. That was the sponsoring. And almost all medical schools have significant sponsoring. I'm not saying it's an inherent evil, but it's a problem that you have to be very careful. And you don't want to have a situation where that drives the personal decision of your physician, that says, "Oh, so-and-so rep came and visited me. I think you need a statin today, because I'm going to write for this statin." I mean, you want your physician to do everything that they can to keep you off of medications, and not medication be the first solution.
Don't you feel though that is what they're trained, is the first solution is?
Well, it's the easiest solution. It's the easiest because it's easy to write a prescription and it's hard to spend the time to counsel, cajole. And patients also want a simple fix. I mean, they don't want the fix of, oh, you got to change your diet. Oh, you mean I got to spend time at this? I don't want to do that. I want to go through fast food drive-through.
My brother-in-law's a doctor, and he talks about that all the time. He's like, he gets real annoyed because he's a super healthy dude. Works out. I mean, he's awesome. But he talks about that and how frustrated he gets that his patients, they don't want to do the other stuff. They just give me the quick fix pill. That's all I really want. That's all they really care about.
Everybody wants it fixed today. And I do too. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want my stuff fixed too. But I also have to take a look at the long term of it. And sometimes that's not as easy.
Well, it's created a culture, right? We've had pharmaceuticals in our lives for
forever.
Centuries.
I mean, we've had pharmaceuticals forever.
It's called the witch doctor, bud. Drink this little cocktail I just made. It's a potion. You're gonna be okay. It's mercury, but don't worry about it. It's shiny.
I mean, I guess there's always going to be types of people like that in every profession, but like it sounds like something that has to start on a just basic educational level.
I think it
Yeah.
has to be started on. So if it was me, I look at incentives, and I think that you're not going to change the supplier side. I don't think that the pharmaceutical company is going to wake up tomorrow going, I don't think we should make as much money.
Yeah, no.
I think that we should limit what we produce and only make things that are healthy for people that improve the health of the population instead of we want to make the most amount of money for our shareholders. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that that's going to happen immediately anyway. But what you can do is have the consumer say, hey, look, I'm not going to put up with this. And I expect a real solution. I recognize that I've been fed a pack of lies on what dietary intake should be. And I want people to help me and go to the physician and say, look, I've heard about this. Let's talk about it. You know, and that's how if enough people do that, there'll be enough physicians that go, hey, I want to talk to you about this because there are people looking for this solution. And that's how you fix that economic issue. You have the consumer saying, hey, I got to do this. Now, the problem in this is the media, because the media will manipulate the information, making the consumer think that this is healthy. Oh, this is heart healthy because it's got this stamp on it. And it's approved by the American Heart Association, which happened to get a bunch of money from the vegetable oil companies, which happened to get a bunch of money from the sugar companies, which happened to get, the Kellogg's is heart healthy. It's better for you. Do you know the origin of Kellogg's, by the way?
We have talked about the eugenics program here.
Yeah, the John Harvey Kellogg,
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventist. And the actual origin is that he figured out that the grain in the feeding people grain all the time dropped male testosterone, so they quit masturbating in his insane asylum. And so that was the origin of cereal. And the Seventh-day Adventists own most of the cereal manufacturers in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And it started for a good reason. So the origin of Seventh-day Adventism is amazing because what it was there was a lot of brutality and violence against women. And this was when the religion initially initiated. And so they were trying to figure out, how do you reduce violence against women? And one of the things was, well, if you put people on a vegetarian diet, they're less violent. And that was essentially the origin. That's why a lot of our nutritional associations are funded and co-sponsored and taught by the Seventh-day Adventists. It's on their website. They're very proud of it. And so a lot of the American Nutritional Association is funded by the cereal companies.
It's a phantom fact right there, Dr. Padda.
Yeah.
Love it. Thank you. That's interesting. I mean, I guess you would think at some point this corporatism, this union between the government and the corporations, especially in the food industry, would have to butt heads because the government wants to keep a population too, right? So at some point you would think, there would be some sort of change process.
Why does the government need to keep a population if they can print all the money they want?
I'm trying to find hope here, Dr. Padda.
Yeah. So, I mean, what it wants is a docile population. It doesn't want a population that is too strong. It doesn't want a population that can think too much. This was the whole freedom trucker thing up in Canada. I mean, it does not want a population that might oppose anything. It wants a population that's compliant. And I understand that. I mean, we all want people to listen to us. But it's not that it doesn't want a population because it can, the reason why you have a population is because you want to have productivity or you want to be able to generate revenue. And but if you can manufacture your own money, then you don't have to worry about that anymore.
You just need resources. You just need a human resource.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it also that then belies another issue is that if you reward the population a particular asset, a particular portion of the population with subsidies to vote for you, then that might sway elections. And that might allow one governmental body over another one to have power. And so these are all things that are moral hazards when you start pumping out money and sending out rewards.
It doesn't feel very comforting.
I think at the end of the day, America is probably the best country out there. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm a crisis investor. I've been all over the world. I go into areas that are just utter crisis. And I've been in places in war zones getting shot at. And, this is still the best country on earth. There's no doubt in my mind. So we just have a few things to tweak. But I think that the people have to wake up. They have to wake up to the fact that, they're not supposed to be completely docile. We have a saying in Sikhism that our job is Sikhs, our middle name is Singh, S-I-N-G-H, which means lion. And all Sikhs have the same middle name. And your job as a Singh is not to wake up the sheep, it's to wake up the sleeping lions. Because you can't wake up a sheep. You can't turn a sheep into a lion. You're not going to do that. So you got to wake up the sleeping lions because they will be able to help you. And so that's what we need to do.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to end the show. Let's wake to our audience, wake up all our sleeping lions out there. It's fascinating for me. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. Is there anything you would like to plug? Your website that people can go check out more information about you?
The easiest way is just connect through LinkedIn or go to the website reversediabetes.md or addictionology.center. There's tons of free information on there. And on reversediabetes.md, there's not even like any way that you can pay us. I mean, all the information is free, everything. And we just want people to recognize what's healthy and what's not. And you can go on the other YouTube areas and look at some of the lectures that I've recently done, especially when it comes to how dietary intervention that we've had is changing our metabolism such to the point that we're more and more likely to participate in things like the metaverse, and how it's changing our gender roles and it's changing our attention spans. We've gotten to be a TikTok nation where our attention span is down to like less than that of a goldfish. It used to be like 19 seconds, 20 seconds, and now it's like less than 5-point-something seconds. And that's primarily driven through the casino effect of social media. And so there's all those lectures and stuff, and people may find them interesting, and just they can always reach out, and I'm happy to chat.
Dr. Padda, we would love to have you on the show again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
That was Dr. Gurpreet Padda. Well, I mean, man,
he's my people,
it's what a great guest. I felt like, man, I could talk to him for hours.
Yeah. I wanted to ask him, is that way vegans are like, so fucking crazy? Well, I was gonna let him down.
I guess it got a lot more vegetable oil in them too, so maybe it counted. Yeah,
they don't eat any of the they eat all the bad shit, bro.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, everything in moderation, I'm sure.
It's like, fuck the vegans. We all get it. I agree.
Yeah, I love it.
I don't know. I think he's right though. It's a lack of
it's the only way you're gonna get it to fix is through self-awareness of the consumer.
Well, and we're a herd mentality, and we need accompaniment and people and friends and put ourselves out in group settings. I feel like, just sort of shock your system because we've been so isolated from
social media. Just does that, right? Like,
yeah, it's antisocial. Yes.
I mean, you can hang out with your friends if you want to online, or you're like, you know what, I'm gonna go fuck off for a while, and you don't really do anything. Like my kids are that way. Like, I'm like, get out of the house, go do something, and they're like, no, I'm fine. Friday night, they're fucking all home by like 9:30, 10, if they go out at all. And I'm just like, man, I tore up the town when I was your age, bro.
Yeah.
Like, lucky if I've made curfew. You know what I mean? But we also didn't have social media like they do now, where you're just connected to your friends all the time.
It was really that's really the most genius invention to make a group of people docile with social media.
Well, I mean,
really, people, they can sit there and they moan.
you could argue that, people that meet at a brewery and drink, that's social, but yet they're still all feeding an addiction.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, think about the last time I saw it was when Pokemon Go came out. And I remember in our small town just being like 30 kids in one area. And I mean, that's sort of how I remember being young. It's just, it was sort of cool to see, but it lasted a summer and then it was over, everyone was back indoors and stuff. But
we were watching, so yesterday we decided to just kind of do like a movie thing, got some fucking cheese and caramel fucking popcorn that you can mix together and like some chocolate Raisinets. And believe it or not, I was like, hey, we should watch Twilight, I know. I love those movies. Are not bad, bud.
Don't you?
But anyway.
No.
Yes. Those movies are not bad. I love them. Anyway.
That's the real Phantom fact of the day.
The second one is sus. It's like, man, we all agree.
The first one is sus.
She loves her.
All she does the whole time.
Oh, bet. She can't talk with a complete sentence without pauses and stuff. But anyway.
Okay.
Give me up the train of thought. Oh, in it, like, remember when Twilight came out in the early 2000s? Phones still really, like, I don't think the iPhone was invented yet for the first movie.
No, iPhone was
invented.
And
so in it, like, her mom's on a pay phone or she's always on a fucking house phone, stuff like that. There's no social media in that movie at all. Like, if you want to call someone, you better go find a fucking telephone. You know what I mean? She when she goes to the bookstore to find like the research about like the Quaaludes versus the cold ones kind of deal, she had to go online and go to like maps and download the directions and write the address down for that place so she could find it. I was like, that's how it used to be, kids. You had to go to your computer to get directions. There was nothing that would tell you how to get there. It was real interesting to see that. And it wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. It's an adaptation thing, right? You can't hide it from them. You gotta teach them how to not ruin their lives, type of deal.
Exactly. That's what I've tried to do that with my kids.
Oh my God, Chris Mays.
She is awesome. That was like one of her first movies too, if I remember right.
She's not awesome.
You don't like Anna Kendrick?
No, she's
why? She's too liberal for you or something?
She's just garbage. No.
Wow. Well, you're just trying to piss May off. Is what you're doing.
All right. Hey, I didn't think we came across too stupid in that interview. You asked some killer questions, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. It was good shit. Proud of you guys. Proud of you, Devin.
Oh, thanks. I do. See, okay. There it goes.
No, it's
I had nothing.
Thanks to Chris May, Naomi, and Sunshine for all being in the comment section, lighting that up. It's just full of stuff. So sorry we couldn't get to everything. Next week, big show next week, March 1st. Well, yeah, no, I don't think we're going to have a show till March 1st, which is a Wednesday night show, special Wednesday night show to have Joel Souza on to talk about Lilith, the Leviathan. We might do a Toppies on a Sunday. Just
Lilith, the Leviathan. What is that?
Yeah, it's so these are ancient Hebrew creatures that are talked about in the Hebrew Bible, and were never included into the Bible translations we have today. And so Lilith, there's a whole, she was created before Eve and went rogue. So it's one of those. And then Leviathan is, to my understanding, a huge sea monster. And there's other mythical creatures mentioned in the Bible. So Joel Souza is going to enlighten us on that one March 1st. I'm excited about that one. We'll probably do a Toppy Sunday. So we'll see you next week. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.